Hey guys, Chris here, and I'm Ukrainian Canadian. Today is December 12th, 2024, and let's get to the news and updates happening in Ukraine and Russia, shall we? So, first, I want to talk about some good positive news with regards to Ukraine receiving a new batch of military aid from the United States, and also Ukraine resuming its airstrikes, missile strikes, and drone strikes over Russian territory last night. So, let's talk about first the Ukrainian strike in Tahanrog, which is a border city in Russia, which borders Ukraine. It's a very important city for Russia because they have a military airfield, they have several bases there, and Ukraine has launched a huge missile strike over the city, over the military facilities present in the city to destroy several plants. As you can see here, Ukraine managed to hit the airfield, aircraft repair plant, military unit where the 5th Aviation Group of the 6955th Aviation Brigade is stationed. And as a matter of fact, I brought this airfield and repair plant in the past. I brought it up because Ukraine actually, I believe, a few months ago managed with a few drones to strike a hangar in this airfield where an A-50 was being repaired. So it's unknown how damaged that A-50, it's an AWACS plane, how damaged it was, but this is not the first time that Ukraine has struck Tahanrog and its military airfield and repair plant. Additionally, last night Ukraine also hit the barracks of the Special Police Regiment in Grozny, Chechnya. I shared with you guys an image from somebody driving in a car and taking a video of the strike, which was very, very nice to see. And also Ukraine hit an oil depot in Bryansk as well. As you can see in this image, this is the oil depot that was struck, and that's not the first time that Ukraine also struck this oil depot. So you can see that now Ukraine is repeating a lot of strikes now that they've hit most of the military facilities and buildings. So now Ukraine is just trying to finish the job and damage them and destroy them as much as they can. So this is great news. And today, as a matter of fact, right now, Ukraine apparently has launched a new airstrike campaign using ATACMS, drones, and perhaps other Ukraine missiles. We've talked about the different missiles the Ukraine has produced, and Russians are saying that apparently the Novoshakhtinsk oil refinery was hit again with ATACMS just right now in Rostov, and that there's more missiles flying towards other facilities and other buildings. So Ukraine, you can see, has started resuming its strikes, and that's exactly what I've said in the previous video, that Ukraine needs to have these big statement days and hit as many military targets as possible. Whether it be, again, oil depots, oil refineries, airfields, military bases, administrative, military buildings, factories, all of them really, when you accumulate over time all of these strikes, it really puts a lot of pressure on the Russian military, and that will exhaust them eventually. So this is great news. And just to show you guys on the map where Tahanrog is, you can see how, if I'm switching the tabs here, you can see that this is the airbase that Ukraine has hit. There's actually two of them. There's one here more south, and there's another one that is north of the city. So there's, it's a very big city, and it's mainly used as kind of this border fortress for the Russians. Of course, they also have the occupied territories in Donetsk, in Donbass, but Tahanrog is very important for the Russians. And actually, before February 2022, this is where the Russians were amassing a large amount of forces before they initiated kind of a new attack towards Mariupol back in February of 2022. So another thing I want to talk about now is the situation in Pokrovsk. And the situation is not good. And there's, you can see here, especially south of Kurakhove, I've talked about it several times, but this row of villages that were under Ukraine control will likely fall. You can see the Russians were able to form a pocket here. And unfortunately, it is mentioned that there are Ukrainian soldiers still present in this sector around Hanivka and Romanivka, meaning that they literally have a few hours to leave this area before the Russians encircle them. So hopefully the right actions are being taken right now to get them out of this pocket. But this is not unexpected. I've already said it to you guys that I'm expecting that Russia will be able to close the Kurakhove pocket in the next few weeks. And now Russia controls about 60% of the city of Kurakhove, as you can see here. So it's more or less fighting is ongoing at every street corner in Kurakhove, but I'm not anticipating the Ukrainians to be able to hold out for many months here because it just doesn't make sense. You can see that there's pressure from the south, from the north, from the center, as the Russians were taking this row of settlements. So it really doesn't make sense for the Ukrainians to hold on to this area for much longer, and they will have to retreat back. Again, it's unknown where they're going to retreat, but to villages a few kilometers west of Kurakhove, very likely. So Russia is going to align this battlefield here, and you can see as well that towards Pokrovsk, the Russians also continue with their pressure. Ukraine absolutely cannot allow the Russians in this sector to start pushing in the west and east. Again, that's the new tactic by the Russians, is really encircling rather than going headfirst into the cities that they want to take. They instead are encircling, they're pushing on the sides and trying to find the weak spots of the Ukrainian military. And we know that one of the unfortunate situations here is for Ukraine is that, of course, there's a manpower disadvantage. We already understand that very well, that Russia is willing to sacrifice as many soldiers as they need to take this area, especially Pokrovsk. And many will say these are not meat waves that Russia is using anymore. It's not cannon fodder. I think that the term meat wave is more of a philosophy for the Russian military rather than actually using thousands of soldiers every day and, you know, kind of having this no man's land of dead Russians. It's not the case. But certainly the philosophy behind Russia's military is about a one-way ticket. And I think that's why I still mention meat waves, because there is no plan within the Russian military to have you get back safe and sound from a mission, right? You're going to be used up until you die by the Russian military. That's how they see things. This is how they've been voicing this to the Russian soldiers, and the Russians accept it. So that to me is a meat wave mentality that has been adopted throughout the Russian military. It's not the thousands of the Red Army storming Stalingrad type of meat wave, but it very is, in essence, the philosophy that continues on from the Soviet Union, and even before the Soviet Union, the Russian Empire, where the state did not care about its soldiers and saw them as expendable. So this is Russia's attitude as well. But besides, of course, the typical problems of the Ukrainian military having a disadvantage of men, I think it's also a lack of a clear organization from the Ukrainian side. Especially in this sector. Again, apparently the general of the defense of Donetsk has been removed from his position. So the Ukrainian general Lutsenko has been removed, and partly due to the fact that he was not able to clearly form a decent defense of this sector. And so there's serious issues within Ukraine military in this sector. And again, you guys know me. I'm not sugarcoating things. I try to give you truthful information. And this is one of the reasons why Russia, for the last few months, has been able to push, albeit slowly, and with very high costs, but they have been able to push several kilometers after taking Avdiivka. And this is the result of poor organization, poor defenses that were built by the Ukrainians. There's still a lot of issues with trenches and, you know, the fortification lines not being built in the right areas. And of course, the lack of manpower, which is something that you can't really blame the Ukrainians on, because they're definitely at a disadvantage from the very beginning of this war against Russia. But all of these problems really showcase to us that the reason why Russia is having success in this front line right now. So hopefully with the winter coming, this will complicate, and I've said it, that the winter will complicate Russian assaults now that they have to resort more towards either using heavy armored vehicles, which makes them slower, or just using pure infantry attacks, which is mostly the strategy here for the Russians. They're not really utilizing many tanks or BMPs or MTLBs. They're really storming with infantry. This is also part of the reason why it's slow, because they cannot attack with armored vehicles. That will just make them easy targets for the Ukrainians. So that's the reason why Russia is slowly grinding its way through in this sector. But you guys see that it's extremely difficult. And one of the reasons why Ukraine has been able to really hold on for so long with its disadvantages is really the FPV drones. So please continue donating to the Ukrainian FPV drone program. You guys know that I always leave a link towards the Rusuriz drone fund that will be in the description below of this video. So please donate as much as you can. That really helps the Ukrainians continue defending. And there's also another thing I want to give you guys, a silver lining behind this, as much as it's kind of negative talking about how Ukraine definitely has its fair amount of issues within its military, its command, its leadership, and the way that they're defending this sector. The silver lining is, it's kind of a paradox, but the more Russia pushes, the weaker they are, right? I've said it in my post on YouTube community that as Russia pushes and they're they want to control more territory in Ukraine, how can they expect to hold it long term when they know that, to be just generous with the numbers, at least 30% of the Ukraine population, these occupied territories, are hostile towards the Russians. Right? Like holding it long term is going to be a very difficult task, and the amount of resources that Russia is going to have to pour in to continue supporting the oppression of the entire occupied territory is going to be astronomical for Putin as well. So that's the silver lining is, yes, Russia is gaining ground, but the more they gain ground, the more difficult their logistics are, the more difficult it is to really continue holding to this territory. And as you guys saw in Syria, Assad might have taken back 70-80% of his territory, of his country back, but after a few years, everything collapsed in a matter of weeks. And this could very well be a similar scenario for Putin. He might freeze the line of contact somewhere around this, like what we're currently seeing right now, take Pokrovsk, but then he'll be forced into kind of a frozen conflict. But holding this territory for long term, for several years, will be very complicated for him, knowing that there's still a capable Ukraine military. Ukraine is not going to get crushed. And anyone expecting that somehow Russia is going to be able to make it to Kiev by next year or 2026, I think you guys understand very well how foolish that thought is. It's not going to happen. And Putin's main task, again, if we're looking at it from like really, really far away, his task, his main goal was to destroy the Ukrainian statehood, Ukrainian independence. Yes, Ukraine lost so far about 18 to 20% of its territory from Russia, but that wasn't Putin's main goal. It wasn't about just taking parts of Donbass. It was about getting to Kiev and decapitating the pro-Ukrainian government there. And he has not been able to achieve that. So as long as there's going to be Ukraine, a Ukrainian government that is for Ukrainian independence and that wants to gravitate away from Russia's influence, Putin is not going to stop. And that's kind of the paradox, is the more you try to push to achieve your goals of destroying Ukraine, the more that makes you weaker. So you guys can let me know in the comment section what you think about my thoughts around this. But yeah, there's definitely a lot of difficulties in Ukrainians to continue being able to defend this sector. And you can see that there are complications, unfortunately, not only related to the Ukrainian shortage of manpower and also vehicles and assistance, but also within the Ukrainian leadership and command of its military. But I am very hopeful, if I'm to give you a last thought about this, I'm very hopeful with the recent changes by Zelensky. He has made a few changes within the military structure. One very respected commander, Drapati, which now has assumed command of the Ukrainian land forces. So I'm hoping that there will be some serious changes, because he's a very well-respected commander by the Ukrainian soldiers. And so I'm hoping that he will take this more seriously, because if this continues like that and Russia continues pushing, it certainly will complicate the defense of future settlements and cities in Donetsk and Dnipro Oblast. So let's get back to the last two news I want to share with you guys. And the next one is about effective Ukrainian missions on occupied territories and within Russia. So today we had an announcement from the Russians that a very high value target has been eliminated by secret Ukrainian operatives in Russia. So this man, his name is Mikhail Shatsky, and he was a leading designer that was involved in the upgrade of the Kh-59 cruise missile to the Kh-69 level. And he also helped with the development of new drones. And apparently the Ukrainians managed to eliminate him overnight today. And this is not the first time where a Ukraine operative deep within the Russian rear has been able to assassinate and eliminate high-value targets, Russian commanders, propagandists, and designers and engineers. So this is really good news, because this has tremendous psychological effects on any collaborator of the Russian regime and its terrorist operations in Ukraine. So also, I forgot to share that story with you guys, but a few days ago in Donetsk, Ukraine also managed to eliminate the prison chief of the Olenivka colony, which is kind of a prison, and where a few years ago they literally murdered over 50 Ukrainian prisoners of war by setting fire, or I think bombing the prison itself where there were Ukrainian prisoners. And this man as well that was in charge of that prison met his fate in Donetsk with an explosion occurring when he entered his car and turned it on. So Ukraine will not stop. Even if this war ends through peace talks and a ceasefire, Ukraine will continue bringing justice to all of these Russian terrorists that are collaborating with the regime and allowing Putin to commit human crimes after human crimes in Ukraine. And that's really important that Ukraine continues with this type of pressure. If they can't get true justice through The Hague, then Ukraine doesn't have the choice but to eliminate these high-value targets. Now, last thing I want to share with you guys is the story today that came out with Trump. And there's a few good news from Trump. Some of them are not good. And as expected, I shared it with you guys many times in the past that there's going to be good news from Trump and bad news. But essentially, Trump mentioned today, there's a confirmation from the Wall Street Journal that he supports the deployment of European troops if that will happen in Ukraine. So he mentions that he wants Europe to be more involved in the peace talks and have them take the burden of securing and protecting Ukraine, which I really agree with Trump. This is true, right? This is Europe's matter. Anyone watching me from the UK, from France, from the Nordic countries, from Denmark, Finland, whatever, the Baltics, like, you understand that this is more of a question for Europe than the United States. So I do agree with Trump here that Europe needs to take the burden of assuring that this doesn't happen again. He also acknowledges, and I've said it to you guys several times in the past, Trump was saying about ending the conflict within 24 hours. And that obviously is not going to happen when he takes office. And he acknowledges that Ukraine cannot be abandoned, that resolving the war isn't as simple as he thought it would be. I literally told you that, guys. He thought of a thing that, I'm going to give a call to Putin and Zelensky, and I'm going to force them. And within 24 hours, I'm going to, stop the war. Well, not so simple, Mr. Trump, because as you can see, you've met with Macron, you've met with your advisors, you've met with other world leaders, and they all have been telling you that this is more complicated than you think, Mr. Trump. So he acknowledges that. However, the bad news here, so the good news is that Trump acknowledges that we need to support Ukraine and we cannot just abandon Ukraine like that. That we need to make sure that Ukraine gets, a good deal as well out of this, whatever is agreed with Russia, right? A peace, some sort of ceasefire, a DMZ. But Ukraine cannot just be abandoned and being forced into a inferior negotiation position. That, I think, is agreed upon now, even within Trump's administration. So that is positive news, in my opinion. However, he says that he doesn't want Ukraine into NATO. And actually, it's not just the US, but several European countries have said that they don't want Ukraine into NATO, which to me is it defeats the purpose, right? Because if you want to avoid another conflict, right, another war, another February 2022, you need to give Ukraine clear security guarantees, not just written on paper. That's already been done several times. Budapest, Minsk 1, Minsk 2, the Ukrainians are not going to go for another piece of paper that's worthless. Ukraine needs clear actions from the West. If it's not NATO, bring your troops on the border with Ukraine, give Ukraine the long-range weapons, so if anything was to happen again and brewed up again by Russia, then Ukraine can use, Tomahawks or some other super long-range weapon against Russia to destroy key facilities right away, right? You need to bring out the big guns, not just the pieces of paper. At this stage, I think it's very clear to us. So that's the bad news, is that unfortunately, I think that there's still no consensus around Ukraine's accession to NATO. And if Trump isn't backing that, then I seriously doubt that Europe will be backing this either. So I don't know. You guys can let me know in the comment section what you think about all of these statements. So there's some good news, there's some bad news, but one thing is for sure now is that the catastrophic scenario for Ukraine, where everybody thought that Trump is going to just abandon Ukraine, pull the plug on January 20th, it's not going to happen. And it's going to be somewhere in the middle of the spectrum of catastrophic scenario or best case scenario for Ukraine, right? Right now, it's let's give Ukraine what they need to continue defending themselves. It's no different from the Biden administration, to be very honest with you. Maybe give them a little bit more, but so they can tough it out and continue fighting against Russia if they have to. That's the way I see things right now. But we'll have, again, a clear idea as we get closer and closer to January 2025 and February 2025, and we'll see the first steps by the Trump administration. And also, let's not just focus just on the United States, but also on the European leaders such as France, the UK, the Baltics, the Nordic countries in Scandinavia, etc., because they also have things to say here. So we'll see what's going to happen, what is going to happen in a few months. But I'm rather optimistic, more or less, even though Ukraine will not likely get the guarantees that it really wants, like NATO, but perhaps there could be trade-off. Okay, you're not part of NATO, but you're going to be admitted and during on a fast track process to the European Union, right? That could also be compromise. But we'll see. We'll see how things develop. And what I'm saying here is that it's not time to dig graves. It's time to continue helping the Ukrainians and continue giving them everything Ukraine needs to beat Russia, because we see that Putin has severe problems as well. A Russian collapse is not far-fetched. At this stage, we're seeing how bad the economy is doing, how bad Russian partnerships are doing, how bad the Russian military is also doing, and just scraping more and more the bottom of the barrel with vehicles, with weapons. Russia is just really on its way of collapsing. It's just a matter of when that's going to happen. I don't know. Could be a few years, could be a few months, hopefully. Could be maybe even a decade. We know that Russia's resilient, but it's going to happen. So thank you for your support, guys. I hope you enjoyed my update. Let me know in the comment section what you think about any of the things I covered today, about the Ukrainian strikes in Russia, about the assassination of this high-value target, this designer of Russian cruise missiles and drones, and also about Trump's comments and his kind of positioning with regards to Ukraine's help. Thank you so much, and I will see you in the next one. Slava Ukraini!